Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm Natasha Jhabhaskar. The Rajya Sabha has cleared the long-awaited Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 that seeks to improve the ease of doing business in the country by enabling banks to wind up companies faster if resolution or recovery isn't feasible. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who completes 2 years in office this month, had promised to introduce the code to address bank debts and improve ease of doing businesses in Asia's third largest economy. Aim is to take tougher action against corporate defaulters and help banks recover nearly 8 lakh crore rupees in troubled loans. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code will strengthen hands of lenders to recover outstanding debts by setting a deadline of 180 days for companies to pay or face liquidation. Right, and joining me on the program today, very esteemed guest with me, retired professor from JNU, Professor Arun Kumar. Thanks very much, Professor Kumar, for joining us here. Also with me, founder of Center for Policy Alternative, Mohan Guruswamy. Thanks very much, Mr. Swamy, for joining us here. Also joining me on the program is President of PRS Legislative Research, M.R. Madhavan. Thanks very much, Mr. Madhavan, for joining us here. And Business Editor of the New Indian Express, M. Rajendran. Thanks very much, Mr. Rajendran, for joining us here. Coming straight to you, Professor Kumar, how important the bankruptcy code is. The finance minister has called it the biggest economic reform after proposed GST.
You know, this bill is to be welcomed because what it is doing is it's maybe putting together a lot of things that were there earlier into one proper structure and creating a structure so that bankruptcy could be taken care of. Having said that, would it solve all the problems that the industry faces, the country faces with regard to NPAs, with regard to bad loans, etc.? I think that's where the problem comes. If we are to understand why does bankruptcy come about,
right,
you know, then we can see whether the bill would be able to solve that problem completely or not. Now, in a society like ours or in any capitalist society, there are borrowers and lenders, you know. And the purpose of the financial sector and the banks is to intermediate between them. So that's why they're called intermediaries.
Right.
Now, it is in this structure where borrowers are different from lenders. The question is, when the banking system intervenes, how well does it do that task of intermediation? And what is it that those who are borrowing are doing? And in the Indian context, what the borrowers have done is resort to a lot of malpractices,
right,
in addition to the fact that the economy may have a downturn and an upturn from time to time, what's called a business cycle. So business cycle is one reason why industries or businesses may not do so well as expected, and the other is the fraud or the sort of crony capitalism that may be there. Now, when you have a bankruptcy code like this, the question is how soon can you find out whether a company is doing poorly? And we have the example of Satyam,
right,
where the auditors missed out 6,000 crores of fixed deposits, which were non-existent. So the company had gone bankrupt a long time back, and not when actually it was declared by Mr. Raju,
right,
that the company had gone bankrupt. So in other words, you see, all companies depend on dressing their balance sheets.
right.
You know, until the situation comes when they can now no more dress it further. But
So
by
you're saying
then
the
it's
promoters will be more cautious now onwards?
no, promoters, unless you see there's something else as a check on the promoters and the holders of the capital, unless crony capitalism is ended, unless, you know, more strict, you know, in a sense, due diligence is done by the banks, because a lot of banks are not doing enough due diligence.
Can I say this is just a beginning in the right direction?
This is a beginning. It's the right direction. We need to do something like this, but
Right,
a lot more needs to be done if we are to check the problem of bad debts, NPAs, and of bankruptcy and insolvency.
Okay, Mr. Swamy, how one must understand the very definition of this code and how this is really going to change things on ground?
You know, yesterday I was speaking somewhere else and I said that it's very difficult to start a business in India and it's impossible to shut one down. You need both ease of starting business and ease of shutting it down.
Right.
Because if you don't shut it down when it is beginning to hemorrhage and there's no sign of redemption, then you only increase the bleeding. And you just continue on and goes on. So this is one step in that direction, that it makes shutting down also easy and it's required. Business, you know, all businesses don't dress their books. Some do. All loans are not fraudulent. Many loans are fraudulent. Some are more fraudulent than the others. The problem is we have begun to treat this public sector banking this thing as government money. So government money in India, tradition generally is that you don't give it back, whether it is farmers or whether it's anybody.
Right.
Nobody gives it back. You keep evergreening it. All these loans, most of them are evergreen. That is, they show some signs of retiring. But if you see number of new people coming into banking loans, is very few. I saw some statistics which only 38%
Okay.
of credit is new.
Okay.
Rest is all old.
Rest
Just going
is all
on.
old. Okay. Going
Particularly
round and round.
in the rural sector, it's even more so. Okay, this same guy comes back year after year to get credit. So I think how the government manages this business is very important. There is crony capitalism is one face of it.
Okay.
Crony politics is the other face. Both go together because somebody is receiving money, somebody is giving money.
Maybe that's the reason that Raghuram Rajan said that the criminal component of non-performing assets, not all loans are bad loans.
Precisely,
There are many of these
precisely.
infrastructure projects. The projects do go wrong.
Now, take the celebrated case of Kingfisher.
Right.
Now, he made a loss of 9,000 crores. He borrowed 6,000 crores. Okay, he's got some interest to pay and all that.
Right.
Now, he's made a loss. That means he's paid off fuel bills, he's paid off, he's incurred business losses. Now, instead of sitting and saying, okay, how do we sort this out? And he's offering to pay 6,000 crores the principal again.
Right.
Now we got stuck in this whole thing of that he has this business goes into loss, that means you've stolen money.
Right.
Now you've got to get that narrative out of the game. Businesses make losses, managements do steal money.
So that also means simultaneously one must also have stricter provisions in the way you are doing lending.
Absolutely. Therefore, this insolvency thing allows you to say, okay, I can't run this business anymore. I'm losing money. I can't retrieve it. Let's settle.
Right.
So, if this bill was there, Malia's offer would look very good.
Okay.
6,000 out of 9,000, two-thirds.
Right.
Now, the result of it today, you might get nothing.
Right.
You're sitting away in London and
you are asking the authorities to deport and they have refused, and the extradition treaty has
happen.
layers of help for Vijay
London
Mallya.
is the fount, the capital of global corruption.
Right.
If they retire people, then nobody would go to London. All that capital, the Panama
and the very choice of London as a destination is very, very evident.
Precisely.
But if one has to look at the rankings, India ranks an abysmal 136 out of 189 countries according to the Doing Business 2016 report. On average, the secured creditors in India recover only 25.7 cents for every dollar of credit from an insolvent firm at the end of insolvency proceedings, which is technically 4 to 5 years in our country. As of now, this is what the World Bank says. If we compare this with other OECD countries, for that matter, even China, creditors recover 72.3% cents within just 1.7 years on an average. So now we are looking at a time frame of 180 days with a grace period of another 60 to 90 days. How will this really help, and this whole connection with the doing business, ease of doing business, will this happen simultaneously?
Well, one is, of course, this bill to get implemented is going to take some time. So it's not that tomorrow you are going to have everything, because there's a number of new entities to be set up, etc. Okay. Overall, yes. Today it takes on average more than 4 to 5 years to settle, and this at least hopefully less than a year.
Right.
180 days, then there is a liquidation process. So I'm assuming a bunch of things. One important change here is the whole concept of information utilities which they have brought in, which if I may take an analogy, in the stock markets in the 90s, one of the big problems was bad deliveries.
Right.
So you got a stock certificate, you did not know whether it was genuine or not. So hopefully in the electronic system of information utility, takes away the question of whether the loan was genuine or not, whether somebody says my signature was forged, etc. So you get rid of one set of potential delays and disputes.
Right.
So the number of things that is addressing. But since you started on the NPA problem, I think there are two levels of issues. One is there is an immediate crisis going on. So the NPA numbers, 8 lakh crore is recognized, and there are estimates that the another 4 to 5 lakh crore which are there, which people have not recognized. This is larger than, so even after taking out the provisioning, this is going larger than the entire equity of all the banks.
Okay.
So even if you get half of it back, you're wiping out a significant part of the equity of banks.
Right.
That needs recapitalization somehow. Large amount of it is PSU banks, but also some of the larger.
And the amount which is earmarked for recapitalization is not really sufficient.
It's a small percentage of what's possibly needed. So recapitalization can be by the government, it can be by IPOs, opening it to the public.
Right.
There are multiple ways.
Right.
The basic thing is you need to put in more equity capital into banks. And now it's very difficult. There's very little Swiss space, and you can't borrow from the
For
markets.
all
today.
those who said that this whole problem of NPAs, this is just a step in the right direction in terms of tackling the challenge of NPA and knowing very well that how much money is stuck there. The banks don't have the money to lend it for other projects now. Creditors are actually going short on money. We also heard, economists and experts commenting saying this is not really an economic problem. This is a governance problem. And when we talk about NPAs, this is largely a governance problem. And now things are being done to check that how actually on ground things we can really work on things, and that's the very idea of the latest changes in the bills also.
I would actually say it's a mixture of a governance problem and an economic problem.
Okay.
Suppose, suppose the global economy was growing the way it was growing in the 2000s. I don't think you'd have had this problem. If the commodity cycle had been up, you wouldn't have had these defaults by the metals, steel, etc. So there is an economics problem right now. There is also a governance problem because people lent a lot of money to various borrowers where they should not have lent. And there are multiple reasons why they do. Sometimes it's not necessarily corruption. It might be just pressure to beat the other bank because everybody is lending. So you need to lend to shore up your balance sheet.
Okay. The very spirit of this bill, what is the very spirit of this bill? To support banks, to give them and to tell them that you have a say on how you are lending and you can take charge of the situation.
See, what it has done is it has brought in a system and processes in place. It's not that we did not have bills, we did not have rules earlier.
Okay.
What the rules were defunct or were not able to deliver as they were supposed to. You had BAFR, you had many such instruments by which you could recover loans, but they were ineffective also. So as I said, systems and processes have come in place. One. Two, it gives confidence to young entrepreneurs who wants to start a business now. Third, it also gives comfort to the workers working in these companies, joining these companies, because they know that there is a 180 days plus 90 days process by which their jobs is secured, salaries will be paid. So the system and processes which have clearly laid down these rules and rules for the companies and banks gives that confidence to this whole system.
Professor Kumar.
I'd like to point out that there's something called a gearing ratio with which companies operate, which means how much of shareholding you have and what amount you borrow. Now, in the infrastructure sector, the gearing ratio has been very high. And when the gearing ratio is high, then the risk of the borrowing increases. And that is what has happened in our infrastructure sector. Second is that it's in the financial architecture, not only in India but globally, where a lot of credit is being pushed to people who are really not credit worthy in that strict sense. That's the origin of the subprime crisis in the US, where you've had bankruptcy laws and various other laws in place for a very long time. So bankruptcy laws by themselves do not prevent bad loans, do not prevent banking sector and the financial sector having problems, etc. That's why I said this is a step in the right direction. It will take care of certain things, but not of the bigger problem.
The sort of corporate leverage which is being provided to big corporate companies and the way lending is done.
The other thing is that you see, because of the very large black economy, what happens is that there's overcapitalization by industry.
Right.
You're investing 100 crores, but you're declaring it as 120 crores, siphoning out 20 crores. So you now have to capitalize on the basis of 120 crores rather than 100 crores. And this has been going on for quite some time, which means you're short charging the shareholders. And when the bankruptcy is declared, the shareholders will suffer. Labor will also have a problem because even though for 270 days you will have some relief, but after that what happens is not very clear. Whether it will be taken over by another company and run, or whether it be closed down, those kind of things are not very clear.
Post liquidation, will the company who will actually take responsibility of the people working in that particular company?
Before that, the difference between the US and India, the US doesn't have a regulator. India has a regulator, the RBI governor. He regulates even sectoral lending. If you're housing limits, there are steel limits. All these limits are watched very closely.
Right.
So your flagging off comes off in time. So that is one big difference. This other thing here is that there is very little equity brought in by the investor. The investor brings connections.
Right.
the promoter. And then he typically over invoices his capital equipment. And then he takes away a little money, then brings it back as his equity.
Right.
You see this in company after company. They give suppliers bills, that money comes back as equity, and so thing. We know this game quite well. So then there is a vested interest, therefore, in keep this thing going. So he's more interested in promoting more companies.
Right.
And they're moving money, and this concept of groups, that is one group, whether he's in coal or in textiles or whatever, he's one group. It's all nonsensical because each company is a separate corporate citizen. You got to treat each one separately, which we don't.
Right.
You've got all these problems. And then the loans are issued. All said and done, there's no competition between banks. They sit together in Bombay, it's the bankers club, once a week, and decide who's going to take what. The phrase they use, "Kaun kitna khayega?"
Right.
So if there's 10,000 crores of loan to be given, the banks sit and say, okay, SBI takes so much. And that instruction, is given by the finance ministry. Okay. Let's be clear about it. That is where the racketeering starts.
Right. So the important aspect also is in terms of this bill is concerned, that implementation, and also how this will be implemented. Time now for me to slip into a short break. Next, when we come back on the other side, we'll also focus on implementation challenges of this bill. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. In today's edition, we are focusing on the bankruptcy code. Will this really make India an attractive investment destination and improve ease of doing business? Right. So coming back on the issue of bankruptcy code, Mr. Goswami, will this really make India a more attractive investment destination and really change things on ground with its implementation? And what are the challenges in implementation?
Now, you see, when you talk about investment destination, you're thinking in terms of foreign money coming to India.
Right.
Which is, again, a fallacy. Because most of the foreign capital which comes to India is Indian capital. There's money sitting, controlled by people sitting here, and got parked somewhere else. It comes through Mauritius here and there. You look at who's investing, Mauritius, Singapore, Cyprus, these are the countries investing here. So it's got to look good to Indians. If you can't shut your business down, it means your attractiveness of doing business is reduced. Because if you're running into a loss, if you're a genuine businessman, running into a loss, you should be allowed to shut and settle your dues and go, whatever you can. You've got to make that easy because you're taking a risk on your capital. So you should allow them to exit early. So to that extent, it might make it more attractive to new professionals. People who are wanting to start with first hand, say, I won't get locked into this, my family won't get hooked into this, But the old tigers who've been sitting there, who've been borrowed 1.5 lakh crores, 2.5 lakh crores, not able to pay, they are vested in the system, invested in the system. You got to restructure them, which is totally different. Restructure doesn't mean giving more money. Restructure means hiving their businesses off, taking out. Like Tata is forced to sell the steel business in England. No longer making money. He can't carry it. If it was in India, he would have continued. Because first thing is the question you asked. Will labor be protected? So labor protection means vehicle factory in Jabalpur doesn't make a single vehicle, still there. The scooters India doesn't make a single scooter, still there. So that will continue. So that system has to go. If you are not profitable, you shut down. If you are not profitable, you restructure. That is what you need. That, I'm afraid, is not going to come till there is substantial systemic changes. Banks lend on the basis of merit. Banks lend on the basis of project viability, not on the basis of connections.
Professor Kumar, how lending happens in banks? Someone who is watching this program would want to understand how public sector banks in India are lending. What is really the criteria, and is it really done on a sincere basis?
This is where a lot of doubts come in as to what effectively is called, risk assessment of any lending. When you give a loan, you're looking for the viability of the project, whether it's viable, whether it will be able to repay the amount of money that is being borrowed, and therefore a risk assessment is there. And there are reports which suggest that large number of banks in India do not really do risk assessment. If risk assessment is not done, then there's a problem. Second problem that comes in is in a business cycle, there will be a downturn, and when the downturn comes, then the profitability will go down, and what you had planned earlier would not be achieved. So therefore, this is two sets of problems there. Now add to that what is called crony capitalism, and crony capitalism means both politicians and businessmen together acting together. There you see what has happened is, as happened in the case of the unit trust. Unit trust and other such financial companies were told that when the budget comes, you have to boost the market.
Right.
That means you have to buy the stocks.
Right.
Now, when you tell the managers that you have to buy the stocks, they can also team up with businessmen whose stocks are not doing well and buy their stocks. Okay. So, in other words, you buy stocks, you lend to people who are not really viable, and therefore, what happens over a period of time is that your bad stock of loans or of lending that keeps on increasing,
starts
and
piling
that
up.
therefore reduces your viability. Now, in this context, it's important to realize that when businessmen, as Mohan said, have an umbrella pattern of holding. You have holding companies, and then you have other companies that are held, and there is cross-holding amongst them. So you can go from one company to the other company, and you can borrow here and lend over there, etc. And that then confuses the entire picture of lending and borrowing. And therefore, in a sense, unless this kind of lending and borrowing pattern is changed, the banks are not fully able to assess what the risk is, and therefore, they legitimately may claim, even though actually there may be crony capitalism, why they're lending it, but they legitimately claim that this loan was given, and that's what you see in Malaya's case, that he's borrowing here, lending over there, and then borrowing somewhere else, and then
and no one
putting
is
money.
watching. No one is watching.
People are watching, but there's
but
crony capitalism.
refuse to acknowledge
He
actually.
said on record, he got a loan
Right.
on a slogan that they valued the slogan at 1,600 crores and gave him a loan.
Okay. Mr. Madhavan, what sort of risk assessment is happening in the banking industry? And, for long we have debated on why banking reforms were missing and why successive governments have failed to bring in banking reforms. The focus shifting back because you need money for your social welfare issue, schemes. You need money for everything, and which you don't have at this. And the private investment is not coming if the banks are not ready to lend. The overall economic scenario and how with this code, with this bill, things are going to change for banks.
So this code, if and when it gets implemented, will definitely, it's a
What are
move
the
in the
implementation challenges?
Okay, it's in the move in the right direction of you able to do two things. One, first level, trying to figure out whether a resolution is possible, which includes restructuring. And second, if that's not possible, let's do a liquidation. So it's at least addressing the problem and getting ahead with that. What are the implementation problems? Several.
Right.
Okay. First is it will take time. I don't think it's these are insurmountable problems, but it's going to take time. What do they need? First, the regulator has to be set up, and we have seen how much time sometimes it takes.
Right.
They have provision for an interim regulator. I don't know why.
Okay.
Because you need a regulator who has ownership over this problem, not somebody doing this as a part-time job. Okay. Second, the whole structure of insolvency professionals and professional agencies, I don't understand this. It's quite confusing because you're asking the professional agencies to regulate people who are members there, and they not only control the entry of professionals, they also control the code of conduct.
Okay.
So for instance, if you're asking a CA firm to implement the code of conduct of their CS associated with them, why would they ever take the reputation risk of letting people know something went wrong?
Right.
So there's a conflict built in there.
Conflict of interest.
Third, it relies on the NCLT for companies and DRTs for individuals.
Right.
NCLT still doesn't exist, though the Companies Act was passed 2 years ago and the Supreme Court judgment came almost a year ago. DRTs, there are over 60,000 cases pending. They clear about 10,000 cases a year,
Right.
and their cases still coming in.
Right.
So we need to put in massive infrastructure in these to be able to do things faster.
Right. So 70,000, more than 60 to 70,000 cases already pending, and then you're actually handing over them
You're
more
giving them
cases.
extra work.
You're giving them extra work when the piled up work is also not cleared. Yes, Mr.
I'd make 2 points here. When we had bouncing of checks bill, it came out Rajiv Gandhi's time. Many of us told him that you must have this because the instrument is of no meaning because people regularly bounce kite
Right,
checks,
right.
and you can't recover. You go to court. So he said, made it a criminal offense. That is very simple. The act is very simple. The check bounces. You don't have balance in the bank that day, and it's bounced. You are committed a criminal offense. You go to jail. Now, today, if you go to the court system,
Right.
the system is clogged with check cases,
Right.
kiting check cases.
Right,
You know?
right.
So we've managed to hamstring the whole thing. So today people are still kiting checks merrily because they know nothing will happen. They'll go and sit in court for 50 years. Even
Right.
credit card debt is stuck. Then we've had BIFR before. BIFR was supposed to do exactly this function, to restructure your loans, to talk to creditors, to do all this. BIFR then became a rent collecting agency.
Right.
You go to BIFR because you want to
So
postpone the
role of
inevitable.
courts also, because there's a high level of pendency of cases as far as courts are concerned, and under the new law, a debtor could be jailed for up to 5 years for concealing property or defrauding creditors. Bankrupt individuals would be barred from contesting elections as well. But the bankers, on the contrary, also say that courts are usually reluctant to sign death warrants against defaulting companies to safeguard jobs, which often results in winding up procedures and poor loan recoveries. The delays keeps going on because the courts also don't take any harsh actions and will, in terms of safeguarding jobs, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah, I just want to add among the issues, the problems which will come in implementing is we do not have professionals to address this. Currently, you will have bunch of CAs and corporate lawyers who will be managing it. It requires professionals. There is no university in India as such which has had this kind of exposure, and that would require real skilled professionals to handle these kind of institutions and to adjudicate issues. Same applies to the courts. The court, why judges or lawyers would not be able to argue the cases, that it will require much more specialization in this.
Okay, Professor Kumar.
What Mohan was referring was to Section 138 for check bouncing cases. Initially, the decisions used to come in 2 to 3 months. Now they come in 4 to 5 years. And that's why, you see, what has happened is that people bounce the checks. And in fact, in one case that I myself faced, a businessman gave me in court 6 checks, and he bounced all of them. And then I told him that this is contempt of court. So he said, look, if I had wanted to pay you, I would have paid cash. Why would I have given you checks? And he wasn't worried about contempt of court. And I asked my lawyer, he said, look, if you find contempt of court, it'll take many years again. So just forget it. So what the point I'm making is that judges in the courts are not taking decisions on the basis of this. Similarly, in 12(6) cases where you've signed lease agreements, the case should be settled in 3 months. It'll take 5 years, 6 years. So people therefore do not follow the.
This problem will again happen even through this
exactly. So that's what I'm pointing out, that unless the judiciary becomes accountable to the public, in the sense that they do their work properly and they do it in time-bound manner, until then any law that you have can be circumvented and can be violated, and those who want to do that violation will actually get encouraged because they know that they'll get off with it.
Actually, in the US, bankruptcy is very simple. I remember my dentist cancelled an appointment with me saying that, look, tomorrow I have to file my bankruptcy. I'll see you day after tomorrow. So I asked him, what did you do? He said, I just went and said that my income doesn't match my expenditures now, the interest I have to pay and all. So I'm just
bankrupt,
folding up.
My business is bankrupt, but
so
I can.
The bank then declared him bankrupt, said you're bankrupt, and then said, okay, we'll reschedule everything else after that. So then he gets a new lease of life. So he's back in business. So that is what you need. You don't need an army of professionals to do this. You need a clear intention, clear-cut direction. Don't tie it up in bureaucracy. If you tie it up in any rent collecting agency, like BIFR was supposed to do exactly this. It's become, everybody now wants to go to BIFR. I don't want to pay his loans, I go to BIFR and sit down. And I'm sitting there merrily for years to come.
Can we replicate the US model in India? Is it possible?
It is possible. Why not? Make laws very simple. Make one-page laws. It becomes very clear. The check, for instance, kiting a check, you don't have a balance that day. Why should you have to go to court for adjudication? All you have to do is just prove that you didn't have the balance, bank statement, the check is there, lock him up. It doesn't. It gets stuck and stuck and stuck, and and then we get a vested interest, we give up after that. This is what is derailing business in India.
Okay, so for all those who are saying that the bankruptcy code will promote jobs, availability of credit, ensure timely resolution of financial distress of companies, this is not really going to happen overnight. This is going to take a lot of time. 5 years down the line, we can hope that the implementation will happen, will start happening, and because there's also fear factor. Will this also, scare companies that you just can't keep taking loans without even?
No, this is for the protection of companies.
Right. This is for the protection of companies.
Absolutely, because a businessman also has to be protected.
Okay.
You don't get him locked into something which he can't do business in. Labor and all have to take a shave when the businessman is taking a shave, because his is the risk capital.
Right. Mr. Madhavan, yes.
So if I look back about BAFR was there, wasn't working. For collecting, we said, okay, the court system is very slow. Let's have a parallel court system. We'll have DRTs.
Right.
Now you see pendency. Then I said, okay, secured guys, let's get rid of the court system. We'll have the executive magistrate, and he goes and just collects his collateral. Well, it's and in a time-bound manner, not working. Okay, so now we have this code. Hopefully, it works. We don't know. So we haven't had great success in the past in trying to make mechanisms which works. One big move is, as he said, you can voluntarily shut down if you want to. That's a big move. A second, and in that case, I don't know how we are going to handle the various labor laws which come into the picture. Does this supersede all the labor laws which require me permission before I shut down? Because if I liquidate, because there is a contradiction here with that. And that is a serious issue. How do we address these problems?
Right.
And just to conclude this, we keep talking about ease of doing business, right? Why do we need that? It's because we need jobs. This country is at a jobs crisis, and government can't employ everybody.
Right.
We need the private sector to create jobs, and for that we need to make it easy for them to do that. That's where everything comes from. Is this doing that? Maybe partially, but this is not the silver bullet to solve all your problems.
Also your comment on this insolvency and bankruptcy fund. What will be the purpose of this fund? Because there's not much clarity on this.
I have no idea why that fund exists. It's a beautiful fund.
Okay.
There are two sources through which the money comes in. One, the government can give money, and two, any person can give money, and the person can withdraw money, only the principal he has put in, no income on it, if there is an insolvency process.
The money will be to help a particular company. How this money will be used?
I have no idea.
Okay.
The only purpose that's mentioned in the Act is that the amount you have contributed, you can withdraw that with no income on it. Why would I ever contribute? I'll put my money in a savings bank account and earn 4%.
Okay, yeah.
It negates the purpose of having a bankruptcy law. You don't give him more money. If guy going wants to declare bankruptcy, don't say take some more money before you go.
Okay.
You don't do that.
Professor Kumar, this whole ease of doing business and creating jobs, because that's the very idea. Entry procedures, exit procedures. This code is going to make things easier for companies and improve their exit procedures also. If you don't have the money, if you can easily liquidate and just leave. How do you see new companies coming up and setting their shops here and feeling motivated after this code?
Ease of doing business really would work, then investment would come in.
Okay.
Because without investment, you don't get employment. Now, investment in India has fallen after 2008 when it had peaked at 38%. It's come down to about 29-30% now. So it's fallen by about 8-9 percentage points, and that has nothing to do with what is the ease of doing business, because the ease of doing business was the same before 2008 as it is today. So what are the reasons why the economy is not picking up investment? It is because of the lack of demand.
Right.
And that lack of demand has to do with the idea that there is a growing inequality. At the mass level, demand is not growing, and because the mass level demand is not growing, therefore you have this problem that there's overcapacity in industry. Secondly, there's overcapacity because export sector has been declining for the last 16 months. It's showing minus 14-15% rate of growth. The world economy is not doing all that well. So that's also affecting China. China is facing a slowdown in the economy from the high rate of growth that it had to roughly 5 to 6%. So again, globally, what is clear is that the lack of demand in the world economy is affecting. So ease of doing business is one thing, but how do you get investments going is another thing. And that's where you see these NPAs, these bad loans, the overcapitalization in the infrastructure sector. Those are factors that come in, because you can push infrastructure investment, but the private sector will not do it because they're already overcapitalized.
Right.
Public sector can do it, but public sector in the last 7 years had actually cut back plan expenditure by about 7 lakh crores.
Right, and the data says $1 trillion of investment in the infrastructure sector, and where will that money come from? As rightly pointed out, private investment also. How do you really motivate the private investor? Time now for me to slip into a short break, but in our final segment, we'll try and understand what this government has achieved as far as economic ground is concerned in the last 2 years, and what more needs to be done. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Inside. In our final segment, State of Indian Economy, where are we headed and what we have achieved in last 2 years of Modi government. Coming back to you, Professor Kumar, on this, the big talk on economic
Right.
reforms, and in last 2 years, are we really on the right track?
You know, first we have to see whether the economy is doing better or worse or the same. If you look at the industrial sector, it's not very good. You know, I mean, the latest figures are that it's just grown by 0.1%. You know, in the last data that has come out, but overall it's growing at barely 2% or thereabouts. Agriculture has seen 2 very bad droughts, therefore there's a problem there. Export sector has a problem. In services, banking is facing a problem. Real estate has been down for quite some time along with the construction sector. So in other words, there is a fair amount of very poor performance of the economy when you look at the overall aggregate picture. So this 7% or 7.5% that people are talking about, there's a lot of doubt that people have put on it, not only Indian economies but also abroad, whether we are really growing at that rate of growth and whether we can actually step it up to 8% by doing some other reforms. That's one. Second is the global situation will affect us because we have far more open economy. And global situation is not very good. The US economy is slowed. The rate of employment growth has slowed down in the last data that came out, whereas earlier it was doing somewhat better. Eurozone has been in a problem. Japan, China, Russia and Brazil and South Africa are in recession. So amongst the BRICS, you know, India is doing better than the other economies, but overall the situation is bad. Politically, the situation is also bad because you have the West Asian crisis going on, which affects the oil prices and so on. You have Ukraine, you have Nigeria, you have Libya and Egypt. There's a huge arc of instability. So we have to plan, given the large instability, both externally and internally. If we do not do that, we will not be able to take care of it. So in other words, internal policies of generating greater demand, that becomes very important. And that's where I think we've got a problem.
Even when China started focusing on how to really boost its domestic demand, and we have generally...
we haven't really changed our policy paradigm as compared to the UPA. So in other words, we are continuing with what the UPA was doing, whereas we needed to change the paradigm so that we could push more investment into the economy, which would have then generated growth and employment.
Okay, where is Indian economy headed? India is a bright spot in the Indian economy?
Well, India is a bright spot for so many other reasons. But you know, to give the devil its due, this government inherited a bad situation. The economy was already slowing down. Capital expenditure, capital. No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
It was picking up. The data seems
it wasn't. You know. Capital expenditure was low.
Right.
Subsidies were very high, going out of control. So the government was investing heavily on giveaways. It's like a choice between, you know, buying milk in the house or smoking cigarettes.
Right.
You know, milk is you invest on the children. So if you shift the money to smoking, then so it affects you. So this is the choice they had to make was to cut back and to make radical departures from the past and come into getting more infrastructure spending, more capital expenditure. They promised that but didn't do it. They've continued on the same old track. And that is probably the biggest problem. Now you're resorting to fudging out data. You know, nominal GDP has actually come down hugely. In the first budget, the finance minister said he's expecting 12.3%, and what the government actually performed was 5.2. Now you're getting 7.4 because you got 2.2 deflation. So you're adding it merrily. Now this month, you're going to have increase in inflation.
We already have figures of retail inflation going
so
up.
Your 5% growth,
5%.
if you get 5% WPI, you're zero. So, you know, you have to hope for a deflation, hope for a 5% deflation so that you get 10% growth. You know, this is absurd to pick up real GDP out of context. You still, nominal GDP is the rate at which we are really growing and changing. You know,
no, but GDP theory, apart from that, how much it has really changed the life of a normal consumer in terms of...
It has actually made life difficult for the common man. For the common man is, you know, 65% of people who live in the countryside, who live on the margins, who are on rain-fed areas, you know, where even when you know for 2 years there is a drought coming, the reservoirs are empty. You don't make arrangements to move water. On the day the drought, after it's passed, you're moving a tanker load of water to Latur, and the railways today sent a bill to Latur municipality for 2 crores, saying pay us 2 crores, 4 crores, whatever.
Right.
You know, this is lack of planning, lack of organization, and it tells badly. You know, when you have highly centralized governments, this is what happens. People are not working; they're waiting for directions. You know, this is called the failure of groupthink. That you think the other fellow is thinking for you.
Mr. Madhavan, economy on the right track? If one has to draw a comparison, 2 years.
I would actually look at what the situation is right now. I think we are staring at a number of crisis points.
Okay.
One is, as we started with, there is an NPA crisis. If we don't figure that out, we can't get ahead with investments. The second crisis is, I mean, it's something we have to handle, that the fact that the exports are down for more than a year, negative 15% or so. So we can't export our way out. That's a global situation. So we'll have to figure out, that's a context. A third context is, as I said, the rural distress, the drought situation today. So it's not that we have a rosy picture growing. And all these need to be addressed. And unless we address them, I don't know how we are going forward. Of course, good monsoons could alleviate some stuff. There is a lot of confusion about the data. I mean, IIP growth is something like 0 to 2%, but the manufacturing part growth in the GDP numbers is something like 6-7 percentage points higher. WPI, CPI, there's a huge divergence. And if you look at the broadest indicator available, GDP deflator, that's much closer to the WPI than the CPI, so possibly services, something is happening.
Okay.
So there's a number of questions about what exactly is happening. I don't think we know the full picture.
Okay. Final comments from you, sir.
Employment, that's one thing which hasn't happened. Actually, the whole economy is, based that, you will have a upturn the moment employment starts happening. That hasn't happened. And that's going to be the critical, next step, how the government is going to address it. The moment employment generation happens, you will have everything start rolling, manufacturing and all those things. So clear guidelines should have come by now, which is still unclear in terms of.
Final word from you, Professor Kumar.
Regarding employment, let me say, the focus of the government is on organized sector employment, organized sector investment. Now, that does not generate employment. As we know that the organized private sector employment in 1991 was 7.5 million, it's gone to 9.5 million, only 2 million, whereas the workforce has increased by 200 million from 250 million to 450 million. So organized private sector investment actually has been jobless growth in a sense. Large amount of investment has gone into the organized sector, roughly 80% of investment is going to the organized sector, but really jobs are not getting created because public sector has stagnated, private sector has increased only by 2 million, so everybody is pushed into the unorganized sector.
Right, so the big challenges, ahead, of course, will be on job creation and on
the unorganized sector. Unorganized sector is very important because that's where bulk of your employment, roughly 94% of your employment is there, and there the investment levels are very low. In agriculture, the total investment that's going is barely 3% of the investment. So if you don't increase investment in agriculture, agriculture does not get buoyant, and it needs a lot of investment because of the drought, because of the conditions.
Right.
MGNREGS requires support. Education and health requires support, that will generate this thing. But unfortunately, the central government budget has cut back on that because they say we have transferred funds to the
focus
states.
more on social sector and also on the agriculture sector.
Generation and
then the demographic dividend, because this can be.
Agriculture is not social sector.
No, agriculture as well as education and health.
Right. Economy is basic economics there.
Right.
And we spend money, we spend, agriculture outlay has gone up, but we spend on giveaways rather than on building canals and dams.
Okay, you're referring to loan waivers than more on building irrigation infrastructure. Thank you very much. Completely out of time, and let's hope that we have to see how things will really shape up from here in terms of creation of jobs, because this was high on priority for the government. Completely out of time. Thanks very much for joining us in this edition of Insight. That's all we have for you.